Dr. Elena Vasquez arrived at Stanford University every morning at exactly 5:47 a.m., carrying a worn leather messenger bag and a thermos of black coffee. The security guards knew her silhouette against the early dawn light, but they had never heard her voice. She would nod politely, scan her faculty ID, and disappear into the depths of the archaeology department like a ghost returning to its haunt. For 7 years, Elena had maintained this routine. Her colleagues whispered about the mysterious woman who published groundbreaking papers on ancient civilizations but never attended faculty meetings. Students called her the shadow professor because she taught only one graduate seminar per semester, always in the smallest classroom available, and her office hours were scheduled during times when most people were either sleeping or eating dinner. Elena preferred the silence. Words had always felt clumsy in her mouth, especially in English, which remained her second language despite 2 decades in America. But symbols, ancient scripts, and forgotten languages spoke to her with crystal clarity. While her peers debated theories in crowded conference rooms, Elena communicated with civilizations that had been dust for over 1,000 years. Her office occupied a forgotten corner of the building's basement level. The university had given her this space not as punishment, but because she had specifically requested it. No windows meant no distractions. No foot traffic meant no interruptions. Just Elena, her books, her computer screens, and the endless puzzles left behind by humanity's ancestors. The Maya civilization had captured Elena's attention during her doctoral studies at Mexico's National University. While other students focused on more popular subjects like Egyptian hieroglyphics or Roman architecture, Elena found herself drawn to the complex writing system of the ancient Maya. Their glyphs seemed to dance before her eyes, telling stories that mainstream archaeology had barely begun to understand. Her dissertation advisor had warned her about choosing such a specialized field. Maya epigraphy was notoriously difficult, with many symbols still undeciphered. Career opportunities were limited, and academic recognition came slowly, if at all. But Elena didn't care about recognition. She cared about truth, about giving voice to people whose words had been silenced by time and colonial destruction. The Spanish conquistadors had burned thousands of Maya codices, leaving only fragments of a once vast library of knowledge. What remained were stone monuments, pottery inscriptions, and 4 precious books that survived the cultural genocide. For Elena, each deciphered symbol was an act of resurrection, bringing ancient voices back to life. Her Stanford colleagues respected her work, but found her personally enigmatic. Dr. James Richardson, the department head, had tried numerous times to draw Elena into departmental social events. She would listen politely to his invitations, smile mysteriously, and then simply vanish, leaving him wondering if he had actually spoken to her or merely imagined the encounter. Graduate students were simultaneously intimidated and fascinated by Elena. Her seminar, Advanced Pre-Columbian Writing Systems, had a waiting list every semester despite its reputation for being impossibly difficult. Elena never raised her voice, never showed frustration with struggling students, but her expectations were astronomical. She believed that ancient civilizations deserved scholars who would work as hard to understand them as they had worked to create their magnificent cultures. Maya glyphs covered every surface of Elena's office. Photocopies of stone inscriptions were taped to walls. Hand-drawn reproductions of pottery designs covered her desk. Computer printouts showing various decipherment attempts created paper mountains on every available shelf. To visitors, the office looked chaotic. To Elena, it was a perfectly organized universe where every symbol had its place and purpose. Her breakthrough began with an observation so simple that other scholars had overlooked it for decades. Elena noticed that certain glyphs appeared in specific patterns on monuments dated to particular time periods. While reviewing photographs from recent excavations in Guatemala, she spotted something that made her heart race. The same pattern appeared on artifacts separated by hundreds of miles and several centuries, but with tiny variations that suggested they weren't random decorations. Elena spent 3 sleepless nights creating detailed charts, mapping every occurrence of these patterns across the Maya world. Her coffee grew cold as she worked, her eyes burning from staring at computer screens, but excitement kept her focused. She was seeing something that nobody else had seen, a hidden message embedded in plain sight across the entire civilization. The bull pattern wasn't just decorative, it was linguistic. These weren't random symbols scattered across monuments and pottery. They formed a complex cipher system that the Maya had used to encode important information, protecting it from enemies and ensuring it would survive even if surface meanings were lost or destroyed. As dawn broke over Stanford's campus, Elena leaned back in her chair and smiled. For the first time in years, she wanted to tell someone what she had discovered, but old habits held firm. Instead, she carefully saved her work, locked her office, and walked home through empty streets, carrying the weight of a 1,000-year-old secret. The Maya had been far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. They hadn't just created beautiful art and precise calendars. They had developed an encryption system that had protected their most sacred knowledge for over a millennium, waiting for someone patient enough and clever enough to crack their code. Elena Vasquez, the silent lady in the shadows, had just become the first person in modern history to understand how the Maya had hidden their greatest secrets in plain sight. Elena's discovery demanded verification, but she couldn't simply announce her findings to the world. Academic careers had been destroyed by premature claims about ancient civilizations. She needed proof that would withstand the scrutiny of international experts, skeptics, and the inevitable attempts by established scholars to dismiss her work. The cipher system she had identified operated on multiple levels. Surface glyphs told conventional stories about kings, battles, and religious ceremonies. But underneath these obvious meanings, Elena had detected a secondary layer of information. Certain symbols appeared in mathematical relationships that created hidden messages when decoded properly. The Maya had essentially created an ancient form of steganography, hiding secret information within publicly displayed texts. Elena began, working 18-hour days, surviving on vending machine sandwiches and coffee that had long since turned bitter. Her office became her entire world as she traced the cipher patterns across hundreds of Maya sites. Each monument, each piece of pottery, each fragment of ancient text became a potential piece of her enormous puzzle. The most challenging aspect was that the Maya hadn't used a single uniform cipher system. Different cities had developed their own variations, like dialects of a secret language. What worked for decoding inscriptions from Tikal might not apply to texts from Palenque. Elena had to learn to think like a Maya scribe, understanding not just their writing system, but their entire world view. Her computer screens displayed increasingly complex charts tracking symbol frequencies, positional relationships, and temporal distributions. Elena had created her own software programs to analyze patterns across thousands of photographs and rubbings from Maya sites. The technology that allowed her to process such vast amounts of data simply hadn't existed when earlier scholars had attempted similar work. 3 months into her research, Elena made her second major breakthrough. She realized that the cipher system wasn't just about hiding information from enemies. It served a religious purpose, encoding sacred knowledge that was too powerful or dangerous to display openly. The Maya believed that certain truths could only be safely transmitted to those who possessed the wisdom to decode them properly. This discovery sent chills down Elena's spine. She was reading messages that had been intended only for Maya priests and scribes, sacred knowledge that had been protected for over 1,000 years. Every decoded passage felt like trespassing. In an ancient temple, viewing secrets that had been deliberately hidden from unworthy eyes. The cipher revealed information about Maya astronomy that was far more advanced than historians had suspected. Hidden within seemingly decorative glyphs were precise calculations about planetary movements, eclipse predictions, and calendar corrections that wouldn't be rediscovered by European astronomers until the Renaissance. The Maya had been tracking celestial mechanics with incredible accuracy while Europe was still struggling through the Dark Ages. Elena also uncovered evidence of a vast communication network that had connected Maya cities across enormous distances. The cipher allowed different regions to share complex scientific and political information without revealing sensitive details to potential enemies or rivals. Messages about agricultural techniques, trade routes, and military strategies had been embedded in religious texts and ceremonial inscriptions. As her understanding deepened, Elena began to grasp the true sophistication of Maya civilization. They hadn't just built impressive pyramids and created beautiful art. They had developed information security systems that rivaled modern cryptography. Their scribes had been part mathematician, part priest, and part intelligence operative, protecting their civilization's most valuable knowledge through ingenious encoding methods. Elena's work attracted attention from unexpected sources. Government. Agencies involved in code breaking had somehow learned about her research. She received polite but persistent phone calls from people who claimed to work for various departments, but were vague about their specific roles. Elena declined all their offers of funding and collaboration. Her work belonged to history, not to modern intelligence services. The isolation of her research began affecting Elena's health. She lost weight, developed chronic headaches from staring at computer screens, and found herself talking aloud to ancient Maya scribes as if they were present in her office. Her few colleagues who attempted to check on her were met with increasingly distracted responses and nervous energy that suggested she was pushing herself beyond reasonable limits. Dr. Richardson finally confronted Elena about her condition during one of her rare appearances in the main department. She looked exhausted, her usually neat appearance disheveled, and her hands shook slightly as she held her coffee cup. He expressed concern about her well-being. Elena simply smiled and said she was on the verge of something important. What Elena couldn't explain to Richardson was that she had begun to dream in Maya glyphs. The symbols that had once seemed like puzzles now felt like a living language speaking directly to her subconscious. She would wake up with solutions to decipherment problems that had frustrated her for weeks. The ancient Maya seemed to be helping her understand their secrets. Her breakthrough moment came on a February evening when winter rain drummed against her basement office walls. Elena was analyzing inscriptions from a recently discovered tomb when she noticed something that made her gasp aloud. The cipher wasn't just hiding individual messages. The entire system formed a massive, interconnected text that spanned the entire Maya world. Every major city, every important monument, every sacred codex contained pieces of one enormous document. The Maya hadn't just created local cipher systems. They had developed a civilization-wide encryption project that turned their entire written legacy into chapters of a single vast book. Elena had discovered the key to reading the Maya civilization as one unified text rather than thousands of separate documents. For the first time in months, Elena allowed herself to feel excitement rather than just obsessive focus. She had uncovered something that would revolutionize understanding of pre-Columbian America. The silent lady in the shadows had cracked the greatest code in ancient American history. Elena faced an enormous challenge that went far beyond academic verification. She had discovered that the Maya cipher system contained information that could potentially rewrite the entire history of pre-Columbian America. The implications were so significant that she struggled to comprehend them fully, even as the evidence mounted on her computer screens and covered every surface of her cluttered office. The unified text that Elena had uncovered revealed that the Maya civilization had been far more interconnected and sophisticated than anyone had imagined. The cipher contained detailed records of trade networks that extended from Alaska to South America, scientific collaborations between distant cities, and political alliances that had shaped the entire continent for centuries before European contact. Most, Shocking was the discovery that the Maya had maintained detailed records of their interactions with other advanced civilizations that historians had barely acknowledged. The cipher contained references to complex relationships with peoples in what is now California, the Pacific Northwest, and even possible connections to Asian civilizations across the ocean. Elena found herself staring at evidence that pre-Columbian America had been home to a level of international commerce and cultural exchange that European scholars had never suspected. The cipher also revealed that the Maya collapse, traditionally blamed on drought and warfare, had actually been a strategic retreat. The civilization hadn't died out or fallen apart. Instead, Maya leaders had deliberately disbanded their urban centers and scattered their populations to protect sacred knowledge from an approaching threat that they had somehow detected or predicted centuries in advance. Elena realized that she was reading the equivalent of ancient intelligence reports. Maya scribes had been monitoring European activities long before Columbus reached the Americas. They had somehow learned about Spanish conquests in the Caribbean and had made calculated decisions to hide their most important knowledge before the conquistadors could destroy it. The famous burning of Maya books hadn't been as devastating as historians believed because the most crucial information had already been encoded and distributed throughout the cipher system. This revelation forced Elena to confront an uncomfortable truth about her own field. Academic archaeology had been studying Maya ruins and artifacts for over a century, but scholars had been looking at the remnants of a deliberate deception. The Maya had wanted future researchers to find impressive temples and beautiful art while remaining completely ignorant of the civilization's true achievements and continued existence. Elena discovered that the cipher contained precise instructions for locating hidden Maya communities that had survived the Spanish conquest and continued to maintain ancient traditions in remote areas of Guatemala, Mexico, and Belize. These weren't just isolated villages that had somehow escaped colonial attention. They were carefully planned preservation centers where Maya knowledge had been protected for 500 years. The ethical implications of Elena's discovery kept her awake at night. She had essentially uncovered the location of indigenous communities that had spent centuries hiding from the outside world. Publishing her findings could expose these communities to unwanted attention from governments, corporations interested in their lands, or tourists seeking authentic cultural experiences. Elena had to decide whether academic truth was more important than indigenous privacy and safety. Meanwhile, pressure was mounting from various sources for Elena to share her work. Dr. Richardson had been fielding increasingly persistent inquiries from universities, museums, and government agencies that had somehow learned about her research. Elena suspected that someone was monitoring her computer activity or had access to her academic files, but she had no way to prove her suspicions or stop the unwanted attention. The most disturbing development was that Elena began receiving messages from people claiming to represent modern Maya communities. These contacts came through encrypted emails and anonymous phone calls, suggesting that word of her discovery had already reached the very communities she was trying to protect. Some messages expressed gratitude for her respectful approach to their ancestors' knowledge. Others contained warnings about the dangers of revealing certain information to the outside world. Elena found herself caught between her responsibilities as a scholar and her growing understanding that she had stumbled into something much larger than an academic research project. The Maya cipher wasn't just an ancient code. It was a living system that continued to protect indigenous knowledge and communities in the present day. Her office became a fortress where Elena worked frantically to document her findings while simultaneously trying to determine how much she could safely reveal to the academic world. She created multiple versions of her research notes, some containing the full truth and others edited to remove the most sensitive information about surviving Maya communities. The physical and emotional stress began taking a serious toll on Elena's health. She developed chronic insomnia, surviving on catnaps between research sessions. Her diet consisted entirely of coffee and whatever food she could find in campus vending machines. Several colleagues reported seeing Elena talking to herself in hallways, gesturing animatedly as if engaged in conversations with invisible companions. Dr. Richardson finally insisted on a meeting to discuss Elena's condition and the rumors circulating about her work. When Elena arrived at his office, she looked like someone who had been wrestling with forces beyond her understanding. Her usually careful appearance was disheveled, and her eyes held the intensity of someone who had seen too much and slept too little. Richardson expressed concern about Elena's well-being and asked directly about the nature of her research. For several long minutes, Elena sat silently, clearly struggling with how much she could or should reveal. Finally, she spoke in a voice that was barely above a whisper, telling Richardson that she had discovered something that could change everything people thought they knew about indigenous American civilizations. When Richardson pressed for details, Elena explained that her findings had implications that extended far beyond academic archaeology. She had uncovered evidence that indigenous American civilizations had been far more advanced and interconnected than anyone had suspected, and that some of their achievements and communities had survived into the present day in ways that could be endangered by public attention. Elena told Richardson that she needed time to figure out how to present her work responsibly in ways that would advance scientific knowledge without putting vulnerable communities at risk. She asked for his trust and patience, promising that when she was ready to share her findings, they would transform understanding of American history and archaeology. Richardson agreed to protect Elena from external pressures while she completed her work, but he warned her that she couldn't maintain her current pace indefinitely without serious consequences to her health. Elena nodded in acknowledgement, but made no promises to slow down. She was racing against time, trying to complete her analysis before her physical and mental resources were completely exhausted. Elena's world changed forever on a Thursday morning when she discovered a message hidden within the cipher that was clearly intended for her personally. The ancient glyphs, when properly decoded, contained references to a scholar who would arrive when the Earth had completed many cycles, and who would speak the old language with new understanding. The description matched Elena's work so precisely that she began to tremble as she read the full passage. The Maya scribes had somehow predicted that someone with Elena's specific qualifications would eventually crack their code. They had embedded instructions throughout their cipher system, creating a trail of clues that could only be followed by a scholar who possessed both advanced linguistic skills and access to modern computer technology. Elena realized that her entire career had been unconsciously guided toward this moment of discovery. The personalized message within the cipher provided Elena with coordinates to a location deep in the Guatemalan rainforest. According to the ancient instructions, this site contained the master key to the entire Maya knowledge preservation system. Elena would find not just additional cipher elements, but living representatives of the communities that had maintained ancient traditions for 5 centuries. Elena faced the most difficult decision of her academic career. The coordinates represented either the discovery of a lifetime or a dangerous journey into unfamiliar territory based on 1,000-year-old instructions that might lead nowhere. Her rational mind warned her about the risks of traveling alone to remote areas of Central America, but her scholarly instincts insisted that the Maya scribes had been too sophisticated to create false trails. After weeks of internal debate, Elena made arrangements for a research expedition to Guatemala. She used her accumulated sabbatical time and research funds to organize a small expedition, telling university administrators only that she was pursuing fieldwork related to her ongoing Maya cipher research. She deliberately kept the trip's specific objectives vague, knowing that revealing the true purpose would attract unwanted attention from various interested parties. Elena's journey to Guatemala felt like traveling backward through time. As her small plane descended through cloud cover toward the jungle canopy, she imagined Maya astronomers making similar calculations centuries earlier, tracking celestial movements with precision that European science wouldn't match for hundreds of years. The ancient civilization's achievements seemed more miraculous now that Elena understood how deliberately they had hidden their true capabilities. The coordinates led Elena to a region that appeared completely uninhabited on official maps, but her GPS device guided her to a spot where barely visible trails suggested occasional human activity. Elena hired local guides who seemed mysteriously familiar with the area, despite claiming they had never been there before. Their behavior suggested they knew more about her mission than they were willing to admit directly. After 2 days of difficult jungle travel, Elena and her guides reached a clearing that contained what appeared to be ordinary Maya ruins. Weathered stone structures covered by centuries of vegetation looked identical to hundreds of other archaeological sites throughout the region. But Elena's trained eye noticed subtle differences in the carvings that suggested these monuments contained cipher elements she hadn't encountered before. As Elena began photographing and documenting the site, she noticed that her guides had disappeared. Instead of panicking, she felt a strange sense of anticipation, as if she was finally approaching the conclusion of a journey that had begun long before she was born. The jungle around her seemed alive with invisible watchers who were evaluating her worthiness to receive ancient knowledge. Elena spent hours decoding the new cipher elements she found at the site, using techniques she had developed during months of basement research at Stanford. The glyphs revealed the final pieces of information she needed to understand the complete Maya knowledge preservation system, but more importantly, they contained specific instructions for announcing her presence to the guardians of ancient wisdom. Following the cipher instructions, Elena arranged stones in a particular pattern and waited at the center of the clearing as afternoon shadows lengthened. She felt ridiculous performing what seemed like ancient rituals based on archaeological speculation, but her academic training had taught her to follow evidence wherever it led, even when it challenged conventional approaches to research. As evening approached, Elena heard voices speaking in a Maya dialect that sounded remarkably similar to classical Maya language she had studied in ancient texts. 3 indigenous people emerged from the jungle, wearing a mixture of traditional and modern clothing. They approached Elena with expressions that combined wariness with recognition, as if they had been expecting her arrival, but remained uncertain about her intentions. The eldest of the 3 spoke to Elena in accented Spanish, asking if she was the scholar who had learned to read the old messages. When Elena confirmed her identity and explained her research, the man smiled and replied that they had been waiting for her arrival for many years. Their community had maintained traditions that included watching for the scholar who would eventually understand their ancestors' cipher system. Elena learned that she was meeting representatives of communities that had never fully disappeared after the Spanish conquest. They had maintained ancient knowledge systems, scientific traditions, and cultural practices for 5 centuries while remaining virtually invisible to the outside world. The cipher system that Elena had cracked was still being used by these communities to communicate across vast distances and protect sensitive information. The Maya representatives explained that Elena's discovery had been anticipated by their ancestors, who had designed the cipher system to eventually reveal itself to someone. With the proper combination of knowledge, technology, and respectful intentions, Elena had passed a test that had been administered across multiple years of research, demonstrating her commitment to understanding rather than exploiting indigenous knowledge. Elena spent 3 days with these remarkable people, learning about preservation techniques that had protected Maya knowledge through centuries of persecution and cultural suppression. She discovered that the communities maintained detailed records of European colonization, indigenous resistance movements, and the true history of the Americas from indigenous perspectives. Their archives contained information that could revolutionize understanding of American history if properly shared with academic institutions. Most amazingly, Elena learned that the Maya communities had been monitoring her work for months through networks that combined ancient communication methods with modern technology. They had verified her respectful approach to their cultural heritage and had concluded that she could be trusted with knowledge that had been protected for 500 years. When Elena prepared to return to Stanford, the Maya representatives presented her with additional cipher keys that would allow her to access even deeper levels of meaning in the ancient texts. They also gave her permission to share certain aspects of her discoveries with the academic world, while emphasizing that some knowledge must remain protected until humanity demonstrates greater wisdom and respect for indigenous cultures. Elena returned to Stanford transformed by her experience in Guatemala, but she faced the enormous challenge of translating her discoveries into academic language that would convince skeptical colleagues while protecting the sensitive information she had been entrusted to guard. Her basement office felt small and artificial after weeks in the jungle, but she understood that this sterile academic environment was where her real work would begin. The Maya representatives had provided Elena with guidelines about what information could be safely shared with the outside world. She was authorized to reveal the basic structure of the Cipher system and demonstrate its effectiveness in decoding known Maya texts. However, she could not disclose the locations of surviving communities or the full extent of preserved indigenous knowledge without explicit permission from community leaders. Elena spent her first weeks back at Stanford organizing her research into a presentation that would satisfy academic standards while respecting indigenous concerns about cultural exploitation. She created multiple versions of her findings, carefully editing out information that could endanger the communities that had trusted her with their secrets. The process felt like translating her discoveries into a foreign language that could only express a fraction of their true meaning. The academic pressure to publish her findings immediately was enormous. Dr. Richardson had been fielding increasingly aggressive inquiries from universities, government agencies, and private research institutions that had somehow learned about Elena's breakthrough. Several prestigious journals had contacted the Stanford Archaeology Department directly, offering expedited publication processes for Elena's work on the Maya cipher system. Elena's health had improved during her time in Guatemala, where she had finally gotten adequate sleep and nutrition. But returning to Stanford brought back the stress and insomnia that had characterized her months of intensive research. The weight of protecting 5 centuries of indigenous knowledge while satisfying academic expectations created a psychological burden that Elena struggled to manage. Her first public presentation about the Maya cipher discovery was scheduled for a Stanford faculty colloquium that would include archaeologists, linguists, and historians from universities throughout California. Elena spent weeks preparing her presentation, practicing how to explain her breakthrough without revealing information that could compromise indigenous communities or attract unwanted attention to sensitive archaeological sites. The morning of her presentation, Elena arrived at the lecture hall to find it packed beyond capacity. Word of her discovery had spread throughout academic networks, drawing scholars from across the country who had traveled to Stanford specifically to hear about the Maya cipher breakthrough. Elena recognized faces of prominent archaeologists whose work she had studied as a graduate student, all waiting to evaluate her claims about ancient Maya knowledge systems. Elena began her presentation quietly, as always, but her voice grew stronger as she demonstrated the cipher system's effectiveness in decoding previously mysterious Maya texts. She showed how surface meanings concealed deeper messages, revealing the sophisticated information security systems that ancient Maya scribes had developed to protect sacred knowledge from unauthorized access. The audience watched in fascination as Elena decoded glyph sequences that had puzzled researchers for decades. Her computer displays showed clear patterns emerging from seemingly random symbol arrangements, demonstrating mathematical relationships that proved the existence of deliberate encryption rather than decorative art. The cipher system's complexity and effectiveness drew audible gasps from experts who understood the implications of Elena's work. Elena's presentation reached its climax when she revealed that the cipher system wasn't limited to individual sites or time periods. Instead, It formed a unified information network that had connected Maya communities across enormous geographical distances and multiple centuries. The entire Maya civilization had essentially created an encrypted communication system that protected their most important knowledge, while allowing it to be transmitted across generations. The question period following Elena's presentation was intense. Skeptical colleagues demanded to know why such an obvious pattern had never been detected before. Elena explained that the Cipher system required computer analysis to track symbol relationships across thousands of texts, technology that simply hadn't been available to earlier researchers. She also noted that the Maya scribes had been extremely sophisticated in designing codes that would resist casual observation while remaining accessible to properly trained scholars. Several audience members asked Elena about the implications of her discovery for understanding other Mesoamerican civilizations. She acknowledged that similar encryption systems might exist in Aztec, Olmec, or other indigenous texts, but emphasized that each culture would have developed unique approaches to protecting their knowledge. Elena suggested that her work opened new research directions rather than providing universal solutions to pre-Columbian mysteries. The most difficult questions came from scholars who wanted to know how Elena planned to verify her claims through traditional archaeological methods. They demanded access to her raw data, detailed explanations of her analytical techniques, and independent confirmation of her decoding methods. Elena provided technical information about her computer analysis while carefully avoiding specific references to sites or communities that might be endangered by academic attention. Elena's presentation concluded with a standing ovation from an audience that understood they had witnessed a genuine breakthrough in understanding ancient American civilizations. However, the applause was mixed with obvious frustration from colleagues who wanted more detailed information than Elena was willing to provide. Several prominent archaeologists approached Elena immediately after her talk, requesting private meetings to discuss collaboration opportunities. In the weeks following her Stanford presentation, Elena received invitations to lecture at universities throughout the United States and Europe. Major archaeological journals competed to publish her findings, offering unprecedented editorial support and expedited review processes. Government agencies renewed their attempts to involve Elena in research projects that would apply her decoding techniques to intelligence and security applications. Elena accepted selected speaking engagements at institutions she trusted to handle her work responsibly, but she declined most collaboration offers and refused all government involvement. She understood that her discovery had made her a valuable commodity in academic and intelligence circles, but her primary loyalty remained with the Maya communities that had trusted her with centuries of protected knowledge. The media attention surrounding Elena's work created unexpected challenges. Newspaper reporters and television producers wanted to create dramatic stories about the mysterious professor who had cracked ancient codes, but Elena refused most interview requests. Her natural preference for privacy became an asset as she navigated the complex politics of academic fame while protecting sensitive information about indigenous communities. Elena's breakthrough had transformed her from an unknown specialist into one of the world's leading authorities on ancient American civilizations, but the recognition came with responsibilities that extended far beyond academic achievement. She had become a bridge between ancient wisdom and modern scholarship, trusted with knowledge that could revolutionize understanding of pre-Columbian America while potentially endangering the very communities that had preserved it. 5 years after her initial breakthrough, Elena had established herself as the world's foremost expert on ancient Maya encryption systems, but her greatest achievement remained largely hidden from public view. While academic journals published her sanitized research findings and universities competed to recruit her for prestigious positions, Elena quietly worked to fulfill the true purpose of her discovery. The Maya communities that had trusted Elena with their ancient secrets had given her a mission that extended far beyond academic recognition. They wanted her to use her position in the academic world to gradually educate scholars and policymakers about the sophisticated civilizations that had existed in the Americas before European contact. Elena's cipher work was just the beginning of a larger project to correct centuries of misunderstanding about indigenous American achievements. Elena had developed a careful strategy for introducing revolutionary concepts about pre-Columbian civilizations, without triggering the kind of sensational media attention that could endanger surviving Maya communities. She published technical papers that demonstrated ancient American scientific achievements while avoiding specific details about locations or modern connections. Each publication laid groundwork for broader acceptance of indigenous sophistication without revealing sensitive information. Working with Maya community leaders, Elena had established a discrete research foundation that funded archaeological projects throughout Mesoamerica. The foundation supported indigenous scholars studying their own cultural heritage while providing resources for respectful investigation of ancient sites. Elena's cipher discovery had generated enough academic credibility to attract funding from universities and museums that wanted to be associated with groundbreaking research. The foundation's most important work involved documenting and preserving traditional knowledge that Maya communities had maintained for centuries. Elena coordinated teams of indigenous and academic researchers who recorded astronomical knowledge, agricultural techniques, medicinal practices, and historical information that existed nowhere else in the world. This contemporary knowledge often provided keys to understanding ancient texts that had puzzled scholars for generations. Elena's academic position at Stanford had evolved into something unique in university history. She held joint appointments in multiple departments, allowing her to work with linguists, astronomers, mathematicians, and computer scientists on interdisciplinary projects related to ancient knowledge systems. Her basement office had expanded into an entire research center where graduate students from around the world came to study indigenous American civilizations. The personal transformation that Elena had undergone was as remarkable as her professional achievements. The shy, silent professor, who had once avoided all social interaction, had become a confident advocate for indigenous rights and cultural preservation. She still preferred working alone, but she had learned to communicate effectively with colleagues, students, and community leaders who shared her commitment to respectful scholarship. Elena's former isolation had been replaced by a network of relationships that spanned continents and cultures. She maintained regular communication with Maya communities in Guatemala, Belize, and Mexico, while collaborating with indigenous scholars throughout the Americas. Her work had connected her to Aboriginal researchers in Australia, Maori academics in New Zealand, and Native American historians in the United States, all working to preserve and share traditional knowledge. The cipher system that had initially consumed Elena's attention had revealed itself to be just one aspect of a much larger phenomenon. Indigenous communities around the world had developed sophisticated methods for protecting their knowledge from colonial suppression and cultural destruction. Elena's work with Maya encryption had opened doors to understanding how traditional societies had preserved their wisdom through centuries of persecution and attempted genocide. Elena's research had produced practical benefits for modern Maya communities that extended far beyond academic recognition. The foundation she had established provided funding for education programs that taught young Maya people their traditional languages, cultural practices, and historical knowledge. These programs helped counter the ongoing effects of cultural suppression while preparing new generations to serve as guardians of ancient wisdom. Medical researchers working with Elena's foundation had documented traditional Maya healing practices that led to the development of new treatments for diseases that conventional medicine struggled to address. Agricultural specialists had learned crop management techniques that helped modern farmers adapt to climate change using methods that Maya communities had refined over centuries. The ancient knowledge that Elena had helped preserve was proving its contemporary relevance. Elena's influence on academic archaeology had been profound and permanent. Her cipher discovery had encouraged scholars throughout the world to reconsider their assumptions about ancient civilizations and to look for evidence of sophistication that previous research had overlooked. Universities had established new programs in indigenous studies, and archaeological projects increasingly included collaboration with descendant communities rather than treating them as subjects for outside investigation. The most satisfying aspect of Elena's work was witnessing the empowerment of indigenous scholars who had been marginalized by traditional academic institutions. Her foundation had provided scholarships and research opportunities for hundreds of Maya, Aztec, Inca, and other indigenous students who brought unique perspectives to understanding their own cultural heritage. These scholars were producing groundbreaking research that combined traditional knowledge with modern analytical methods. Elena's personal life had found balance that had seemed impossible during her years of obsessive Cipher research. She had learned to appreciate the collaborative aspects of scholarship while maintaining the focused attention to detail that made her work unique. Her relationships with Maya community leaders had evolved into genuine friendships based on mutual respect and shared commitment to preserving indigenous knowledge. The silent lady who had once worked alone in a basement office had become the center of an international network of scholars, activists, and community leaders working to transform understanding of indigenous American civilizations. Elena's Maya cipher breakthrough had been the key that unlocked not just ancient secrets, but contemporary possibilities for respectful collaboration between academic institutions and indigenous communities. Elena's legacy was being written in the achievements of students she had mentored, communities she had supported, and knowledge she had helped preserve for future generations. The shy professor who had preferred symbols to speech had found her voice as an advocate for cultural preservation and academic justice. 10 years after her initial discovery, Elena stood before the United Nations General Assembly, addressing world leaders about the importance of protecting indigenous knowledge systems. The woman who had once communicated only through ancient glyphs now spoke confidently in multiple languages, translating complex academic concepts into policy recommendations that could protect vulnerable communities around the globe. Her UN presentation marked the culmination of a journey that had begun in a basement office with mysterious Maya symbols and had evolved into a global movement for indigenous rights and cultural preservation. Elena's cipher breakthrough had provided the scientific credibility necessary to challenge centuries of academic prejudice against indigenous intellectual achievements. The Maya communities that had first trusted Elena with their secrets had become her closest collaborators in work that extended far beyond archaeology. Together, they had created educational programs, cultural preservation projects, and advocacy initiatives that served indigenous communities throughout the Americas. Elena's academic success had been transformed into practical benefits for people whose ancestors had created the cipher system she had decoded. Elena's final achievement was the establishment of an international protocol for respectful archaeological research that required meaningful collaboration with descendant communities. Major universities and museums had adopted guidelines that Elena had developed with indigenous scholars, ensuring that future research would benefit the communities whose heritage was being studied rather than treating them as subjects for outside investigation. As Elena concluded her UN address, she reflected on the journey that had transformed her from a silent scholar into a voice for indigenous wisdom. The Maya scribes who had created their sophisticated cipher system could never have imagined that their encrypted messages would eventually reach the halls of international diplomacy, but their ancient foresight had created possibilities that extended far beyond their original intentions. Elena returned to her Stanford office that evening, surrounded by the same Maya glyphs that had captured her attention years earlier. But now, those symbols represented not just academic puzzles to be solved, but living connections to communities that continued to preserve and share the wisdom of their ancestors. The silent lady in the shadows had helped bring ancient voices into the modern world, where they could finally speak with the respect and recognition they had always deserved.